Good evening, this is The World Tonight. Papua New Guinea's troublesome border with Irian Jaya has long been a sore point between Port Moresby and Jakarta. A special report tonight on how the government of Papua New Guinea is closing down one of the most controversial refugee camps said to be a haven for rebels from the Irian Jaya freedom movement. And in the studio, two fugitives from the fundamentalist Islamic rule of the Ayatollah Khomeini, two young Iranians who jumped ship in Australia only to end up behind bars. Two very different refugee stories after the news with Peter Collin.
Good evening. Denmark is voting today in a general election which could affect the future of NATO. Prime Minister Poul Schluter's minority government was defeated last month trying to tighten the ban on visits by nuclear-powered warships.
Denmark lies at the mouth of the Baltic Sea and is crucial to the defence of NATO's northern flank. It's had a loose ban on nuclear warships for the past 31 years, but like New Zealand, it's now demanding a reply to the question on everyone's lips.
Do you know the Danish attitude that no nuclear weapons are allowed on Danish territory in peacetime?
Yes.
Do you respect this attitude?
The policy of the United States Navy, of course, as you know, is to neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons on any ship or unit.
Last month, the opposition moved successfully to tighten the nuclear ban, forcing the Conservative-led minority government to call a snap election. The United States and Britain have reacted with alarm, warning that NATO's cooperation with Denmark may be at stake. Britain has already responded by ordering its navy to stay away from Danish ports. With the superpower pressure has come a surge in Danish nationalism. The slogan of the opposition Social Democrat Party is "Denmark decides for itself." The government is hoping this election will settle the issue once and for all, but the latest opinion polls suggest otherwise. The election result is likely to be inconclusive.
The industrial unrest in Poland has spread to the capital, Warsaw. Workers at a tractor factory there have downed tools in support of the strikers at the Lenin shipyard in Gdansk. The sit-in in Gdansk may have diminished, but the children beyond the walls are maintaining their support.
In between the police vans and the gates of the occupied shipyard, children are playing. For them, it's exciting, something new happening on their street. But older children are heavily involved in the strike, smuggling food and supplies past police lines into the strikers. As the Gdansk strike entered its 9th day, the mostly young strikers continued to be defiant, refusing government offers of small pay increases and guarantees of safety. They still want legalization of the Solidarity Union banned 7 years ago. As the riot police wait outside the shipyard, the government appears to be playing for time. Each day, a few more strikers give up and go home, despite appeals from Lech Wałęsa to stay with him in the shipyard. But a Solidarity activist says that he believes delay doesn't help the government.
Well, I think the time is playing for us, because those demands are obvious, and sooner or later they must be accomplished.
An anti-communist editor in the Soviet Union has been jailed for 7 days for lending support to a new pro-democratic political organisation. Sergei Grigoryants had endorsed the formal founding at the weekend of an anti-communist group known as the Democratic Union. Many of those who attended the meeting are believed to have been detained.
This is what it looked like yesterday as political activists from around the country met in a Moscow apartment to discuss plans for forming an alternative political party. But this is how their meeting place looked today, following an overnight police raid in which at least 20 participants were detained. But a spokesman for the group, calling itself the Democratic Union, said members will not be scared off.
They will fight for democracy here, for political and economic pluralism, for democracy.
Yesterday's meeting was seen as a test of how far the government and Communist Party will go in tolerating a challenge to its leadership. Not since the 1920s has there been any serious political opposition in this country.
We need alternative program.
But almost on cue, authorities were back, checking credentials and underscoring the point that despite party leader Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, or openness, the path of serious political debate remains closed.
Syria has warned that it may have to intervene with force to stop continued fighting between rival Shiite factions in the southern suburbs of Beirut. More than 100 people have been killed in 4 days of street battles between the Amal militia, who usually support the Syrians, and the Hezbollah, who back the regime in Iran. The fighting has spread from the streets to the hospitals. There are reports of shots being exchanged in the emergency wards and of doctors operating at gunpoint. The Lebanese government can do nothing. Syrian and Iranian observers are making a 5th attempt to get a ceasefire. In the Indian capital of New Delhi, 1 person has been killed and at least 2 others critically injured in a bomb blast in the main shopping centre. The explosion ripped through the main hall of Citibank's headquarters in Connaught Place. According to the police, the dead man was a foreigner. Back home, the federal opposition is tonight trying to resolve yet another internal wrangle, this time over the Hawke government's 4 referendum proposals presented to Parliament today. A joint meeting of the Liberal and National parties has now been underway in Canberra for more than 2 hours without result. Political correspondent Jim Middleton.
John Howard turned up for work today with one more problem on his plate. He's under pressure from the Queensland Liberals. They want him to back the government's referendum plan to end the Queensland gerrymander.
In the end, democracy depends on the votes of people, not acres, not regions. We believe that the Federal Liberal Party should look very closely at the issue and at the underlying principle and should support us.
But that idea is anathema to the National Party, which stands to lose most.
I frankly am very suspicious. The whole basis of the questions to be put is to enhance the power of Canberra, reduce the power of the states.
The referendum issue led to lengthy debate in the Liberal Party room, and then the argument was taken up with the Nationals at tonight's joint party meeting. Mr Howard has also declared his opposition to another of the government's referendum proposals for 4-year terms for both the House of Representatives and the Senate. In Parliament today, the opposition leader offered a last-minute compromise.
Would your attitude to our proposal be different if it were accompanied by a proposal requiring the Senate to submit itself to an election if it brought about a premature election of the House of Representatives?
But it isn't enough for Attorney General Lionel Bowen.
4 years for both, and I think that would be the most satisfactory issue for the people of Australia.
There's little doubt that the Coalition will oppose the government's 4-year term idea, and the National Party seems likely to have its way on the one vote, one value question. But the Coalition is also divided on the other 2 referendum proposals, one designed to entrench local government in the Constitution, and the other to establish such basic rights as trial by jury and freedom of religion.
The Secretary of the Labor Party in New South Wales, Stephen Loosley, has been charged over the Harris-Daishawa party donation affair. Under the Commonwealth Electoral Act, he's been charged with submitting an incorrect form, a charge carrying a $1,000 fine. Well, they're the major news stories tonight. We'll have a finance and weather detailed report at the end of the program.
It's a sensitive area, the rugged border area between Papua New Guinea and the Indonesian province of Irian Jaya. Upheavals in Irian Jaya back in 1984 saw 10,000 Irianese flood refugee camps on the Papua New Guinea side. These camps have become centres of support for the Irian Jayan rebel movement, the OPM. Recent border incidents, including a murderous raid last March on an Indonesian transmigration centre at Aso, have prompted Port Moresby authorities to close the camp at Blackwater near Vonimo. The inhabitants are being moved to a new camp at East Arwen near Kiunga, hundreds of kilometres to the south. ABC correspondent Sean Dorney takes up the story from Vonimo.
This is the refugee camp, Blackwater, just outside Vonimo. It's been the home for the past 4 years to about 1,000 Irianese refugees. Blackwater was the first of the dozen or so refugee camps that mushroomed along the Papua New Guinea side of the border in 1984. But whereas all the others are well inland, Blackwater is near the coast. Its inhabitants came mostly from the Irian Jayan capital Jayapura, where they'd been part of the educated Melanesian elite. They fled with their wives and children in tow because they were identified as supporters of the Irian Jaya freedom movement, the OPM, and they feared for their lives after an abortive uprising against Indonesian control. The refugees have been extremely industrious, making Blackwater a thriving Melanesian village, a village that's now being shut down on orders from Port Moresby. Michael Carruth is one of the Blackwater camp leaders. He's a former assistant lecturer in political science at Jayapura's University.
We, people in the Blackwater camp, have worked very hard, building a big church. In fact, 4 churches, a primary school for our children, and plenty of food gardens. We've built our houses out of bush materials, and we've fended for ourselves. These canoes are ours. We built them so we can go fishing. Look, in the camp each week, we are provided with 1 packet of rice, 1 small tin of milk, and 1 can of fish. That is for each person each week. It is not enough to keep us alive, so therefore we have worked hard fishing and gardening. We market our produce to earn some money to buy the basic necessities.
Their prodigious efforts as market gardeners has led to the Blackwater camp supplying an estimated 80% of the produce sold at the Vonomo market. But the Papua New Guinea government alleges that the money they earn is also used to buy guns on PNG's black market, guns which are funneled through to the anti-Indonesian rebels in the jungle.
The Papua New Guinea and Indonesian governments think we have played a part in these recent troubles on the border. But we are refugees under the protection of the United Nations. We have not been involved. Those incidents have been the work of the OPM, freedom fighters in the jungle.
You fella harim talk long OPM, he attack him transmigration settlement long Asa, long March?
Yes. We know what happened. On the 11th of March, it was during the day, the freedom fighters of the OPM attacked the transmigrants who have come from Java and taken our land in West Papua. The freedom fighters killed 202 Indonesian transmigrants. The point of the raid was to bring attention to the demands by the Free West Papua movement that the World Bank and the countries in the West should stop funding this terrible transmigration program, which is wiping out our people and destroying our Melanesian culture.
My government has maintained, and governments in the past have maintained, that what is happening in Irian Jaya is an integral part of Indonesia, and we have maintained that. And my message to the people is that we do not want them to use our soil to cause problems for the Indonesians, and then bring these 2 countries into a difficult situation. And it is very important. We have the interest of about 3.5 million to look after.
Melanesian Indonesia looks just the same as Melanesian Papua New Guinea. What divides the two is an arbitrary line drawn on a map in a room in Europe 140 years ago. That arbitrary line begins here with this survey marker and runs 750 kilometres back behind me across some of the most rugged and difficult terrain on Earth. It's perfect sanctuary country, and that's the crux of the problem. It's a nigh impossible task to seal this border. For instance, the Irian Jaya rebels who attacked the transmigration settlement in March captured 3 Indonesian hostages and scurried into Papua New Guinea. Indonesian troops then pursued them across the border. Papua New Guinea reinforced its forward border garrison at Vonomo, and there were tense times when the soldiers from Papua New Guinea's 2nd Pacific Islands Regiment confronted the Indonesians, ordered them back home, and later secured the release of the 3 hostages.
We accept there is a refugee problem. We see that problem as one primarily for the Indonesian and Papua New Guinea governments to cope with. But that doesn't mean to say that we do not have a keen interest. And that keen interest stems from 3 considerations. The first consideration is geographic proximity. The second one is the financial contribution that Australia provides to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We've been providing, since 1984, something approaching $5 million, and there'll be another further $1 million provided this year, and that, I might say, is 2/3 of the total cost.